Okay, our next talk is Lynn Cullens, and she's from the Mountain Lion Foundation. She's the executive director, actually. And her talk is Overcoming the Heavy Weight of Tradition and the Persisting Structures of Bureaucracy. Lynn Cullens grew up on ranches in Nevada and California's Central Valley, and has been working with the Mountain Lion Foundation since 1989, when she collected signatures as a volunteer during the campaign to pass Proposition 117. After moving to Sacramento in 1990, Lynn worked for a series of environmental ballot initiatives and environmental nonprofits.
I'm a little nervous today, and I'm normally not nervous when I'm speaking in front of an audience, but this is the first time I've done this talk, and I'm kind of going out on a limb. So if I stumble a bit, bear with me. I'm going to be telling you a lot about my family. So that's something I've never done before in a talk. So when I was first asked to speak here at Speak for Wolves for the second time, I thought about what I most recognized in the audience in Yellowstone, and that was that there were a lot of activists from local communities who were looking for ways to reach out to the people that they needed to change minds. And so I wanted to make an effort to try to address one of the things that has stymied me over the years. So over the years, I've encountered the assertion that carnivore conservation is an assault on the tradition of ranching. And while I've considered this notion often, I've never really taken the time to approach it with very deliberate reasoning and by going to a number of seminal sources in the literature to ask questions about the logic and the discourse and the arguments around the issues that ranchers often raise in policy situations. And I think that we do need to dig deeply into our own common debates with ranchers and hunters and many of the other opponents of our causes. And we need to spend time to contemplate discussion, because not only will we uncover better responses to the usual challenges, but we will also uncover some of our own biases and our own fallacies in reasoning. I'd like to do the same thing with our most common opposition, hunting, but I know more about ranching, so I wanted to start there. And since I finally decided to begin to do my homework, and I've just begun, and even though I'm at the beginning, I decided to take you along for the ride. So, okay, wrong thing. Go. The Mountain Lion Foundation's mission is to protect mountain lions and their habitat in the United States. Quite the big job. And it's simple. We speak for the lions because they cannot. And thus, we're happy to speak here at Speak for Wolves. Please join us at mountainlion.org, and there's lots more information about some of the things I'll be telling you today at that site. So here's the question that I wanted to answer. How can I communicate my respect for the culture and traditions of rural communities while at the same time arguing effectively that some ranching practices, including indiscriminate predator killing, are not ethical or justifiable? And I just find this baffling, because I can see the flaws in the reasoning of the ranchers. It's apparent to me every time the same arguments are brought to bear. And yet, I hear those arguments over and over from the Farm Bureau, the cattlemen, the Wool Growers Associations, and from individual ranchers, and they never seem to be addressed with an answer that is convincing, either to the individual rancher or to the policymakers who are listening. Why are their arguments so powerful? And that's where I began. So first I'm going to take a little diversion, and I don't have to take it as long as I thought I might, because Haley and a number of the other speakers covered much of this. Get used to this. Yes, the facts and the science are on our side. When established adult male mountain lions are killed, young males vie to occupy the space, meaning there are more lions, and they are the lions most likely to depredate. This is the research of Rob Wilderness. And the social structure is an important determinant determinant of behavior of mountain lions, and killing mountain lions disrupts that structure. And we've learned that from Mark Elbrock, who has also given us a great deal of information about the presence of predators on the land having great ecological and economic value. And this comes from much research in Montana, Wyoming, and elsewhere, which we're very familiar with. Killing hasn't worked. Livestock losses have not decreased. But the science and the facts do not seem to meet. Ranchers aren't convinced that many losses could be mitigated with cost-effective changes to their livestock practices. Not enough to encourage ranchers to try non-lethal alternatives, or, and this is a really important point to remember throughout this talk, to convince policymakers that they ought to require non-lethal alternatives. So you'll hear me speaking to the rancher throughout this talk, but I'm also trying to come up with arguments that will be meaningful as well to policymakers as they encounter the challenges that we face with opposition from ranchers. So we do need to assemble convincing data. There aren't accessible, persuasive, quantitative and qualitative data to support the relative cost effectiveness of alternative ranching methods. And we've heard a lot today about what those alternatives are, and we're beginning to collect that data in a form that's accessible to the ranching community and the policy community, but we're not there yet. It's really difficult to obtain data about predators, livestock, and depredation. Most ag agencies don't provide reliable or timely statistics regarding the number of livestock on the land over time. The state agricultural agencies do not accumulate data on numbers of livestock across the landscape over time. They don't monitor livestock mortality, and the federal agencies are equally opaque. So the kind of data that we need to actually collect are, first, to collect statistical data to establish the efficacy of alternative methods and technologies, to demonstrate statistically that killing has not worked. And very often you'll see comparisons, statistical comparisons of the efficacy of non-lethal measures, but they don't compare that to the measure that is most often used, which is lethal. We need to provide direct access to the seminal scientific literature on this subject directly to ranchers. And probably most importantly, we need to collect examples of ranchers that have cost-effectively reduced predator losses without continuing external support. Now, this last is perhaps the most important, not only because ranchers often give great credibility to anecdotal information provided by other ranchers, but also because qualitative studies capture attributes of the situation that quantitative studies can easily miss. Now, the thing I'm really trying to say here is that we've got a lot of great info and it's spread across all of our organizations' websites, but there's no central place that we can send ranchers where we get all of the examples from Defenders of Wildlife and programs from HSUS and National Wildlife Federation and the work that we do and the work that Project Coyote does. And we need to take all those ranches that are doing the right thing and put a list of them somewhere. There's lots of things we need to aggregate that are like that. Because ranchers listen to other ranchers. Now this is, skip through this quickly, but we do get these reports every 5 years from, for this report, they're helpful, but they leave things out. And they leave us to do the math, and we're really fortunate at the Mountain Lion Foundation because Bob does a lot of the math for us. But we need to make the connection between the math that we are able, the numbers that we are able to get out of these reports, and the numbers that we can't. And the problem is it's not enough to simply ask them for things. You can't just say to an agency, we want better data. You actually have to show them exactly what you want. So I think that one thing that wolf and lion advocates can do is to campaign very deliberately and publicly for better and more timely data at the state level for all wildlife killing. For example, I've developed a data sheet that I've requested that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife provide for every county every year in California. And we formally requested that this data set be fully collected, consolidated, and posted online every year. This is just the little part, and they pretty much agreed that they're willing to do this within the next 2 years. This is the larger sheet that we expect to see county by county, and I've made enough for all of you, and they're on the back on our table. And we need to ask for the same level of detail, and let me skip back one so you can see this. This is just really simple. We should, if they can't even tell us what the populations of our predators are, at least they should be able to tell us with a great deal of certitude how many they are deliberately killing. And that's not happening across the board. It's really difficult to get that information. So again, don't just ask them for the information, tell them exactly what you want. And this full data set needs to be collected and consolidated and posted online every year for every county in every state. And that way we can begin to establish what the scientific information is in the context of mortality and in the context of both populations of livestock and of predators. So for lions, there's this kind of percentage floating out there that says that mountain lion populations can't sustain without, if they exceed a population, human-caused mortality in excess of 14%. And the problem with this number is that most of the state agencies use this number to say, well, as long as we only kill 14% of them through trophy hunting, then we've solved the problem. But the reality is that you just saw there are all of those other causes of mortality. And if they don't count those, then they can't make even this minimal barrier in terms of really protecting predator populations. And there's lots of things we can do. Shed lambing, some new work by Chris Wilmers where the sound of the human voice scares a mountain lion away. Great video to watch if you haven't seen it, by the way. Range riding and herding, specialized herding techniques that are low stress for the livestock. And all of these things actually can protect predators. So the non-lethal measures do work, killing doesn't, but we still haven't been able to make that argument to the ranchers. This is actually, you can't see it very well, it's a mountain lion coming with that 4-H pig over the top of a pen. And this is the same lion before he was killed the next day by Wildlife Services. We do pens. And in California, the majority of these animals aren't, the livestock that are killed by mountain lions, more than 85% aren't large herds of goats and sheep. We're not really talking about ranchers. Cattle and sheep, they're backyard goats. And so in many cases, those animals can be easily protected because they're in herds of less than 20 by bringing them in from dusk to dawn in a pen. And we work closely with 4-H to do that. And I just want to say as an aside that one of the things I've been working on since 2002 is to get the 4-H nationally to recognize a different way than just calling Wildlife Services. And we found out last month that the National 4-H, as a result of this particular project that we did in Julian, California, has approved a predator curriculum that stresses not only non-lethal measures, but also teaching 4-H students about predators throughout the United States. So we need stable, sustainable, and scalable alternatives, and this comes back to that kind of mishmash of great programs that we have out there on great ranches that are all doing the right things, but they're not scalable. How do we get that to every rancher in the entire West? How do we make that relevant for every local community throughout the West. Because in the reality, the reality is there's 10,000 cattle ranches in California alone. So somehow we have to make this stable, sustainable, and absolutely we have to make this scalable, whether we're reaching out to communities for the hobby animals, the project animals, the goats and sheep in the backyards, or whether we're reaching out to the large-scale cattle and sheep ranches. And so what we have is really, when we're talking about policy, the problem of the status quo. If there is any willingness on the part of traditional large herd ranchers and sheep herders to compromise or to listen, we could come up with steps to reduce losses. But their persistence isn't based on the science or the economics or on any fact other than that they have always held all the killing and political power relative to these questions. The status quo, and our lobbyist, Jennifer Fearing, reminds me of this every time I talk to her, is our biggest foe. Because we are having to try to change what already exists, even though what already exists is wrong. And so the problem for us is that we can make all the arguments in the world, but they hold all the cards. From a wildlife population and ranching perspective, in fact, it's actually reasonable for ranchers to say that they want to retain lethal measures as a last resort. And it's a good argument from their point of view because it maintains the status quo without any requirement that they try anything else first. And then we have the fact that there may, in fact, begin to be a little bit of fear on the part of ranchers, particularly of beef cattle in the United States. Just 2 days ago, a report came out by the UN, which really pointed to, in fact, beef cattle and livestock in general as a major contributor to climate change. And unfortunately, even though this was the picture that they used on the front of the New York Times, and it really pointed to the culprits, it didn't really, in the press release for the report, or even in the New York Times article, specifically say we need to stop eating meat. We need to eat less meat. At worst, we need to eat less meat. Instead, they said something like, some dietary choices require more land and water and cause more emissions of heat-trapping gases than others. Balanced diets featuring plant-based foods such as coarse grains, legumes, fruits, and vegetables, and animal-sourced food produced sustainably in low greenhouse gas emission systems present major opportunities for adaptation to and limiting climate change. They could have just said, eat less beef. Since 1961, methane emissions from ruminant livestock, which includes cows, sheep, buffalo, and goats, have significantly increased. Each year, the amount of forested land that is cleared, much of that propelled by demand for pasture, releases the emissions equivalent of driving 600 million cars. And they're also scared, so they're scared. They're also scared. There's the report, you can look it up online. They're also scared because we have a new generation of wildlife agency staff. We have a new generation of biologists. And we have new technology that makes it easier to study predators. So they have reason to be worried, but we have to work on our arguments so that we can have better responses to the arguments that work so well for rangers. So I began with a whole bunch of questions, which I'll just kind of rattle off. Does where you live give you a special right associated with that particular place? In what ways can those rights be diminished? How is community self-determination and individual property rights limited by the rights of the common? How and why was an environmental ethic created? How was the tradition of ranching created? Can we call on an equally valid tradition of wildlife protection? Is there a tradition of wildlife protection? What is your concept about how urban residents and rural residents are treated unequally? how do cowboys have special rights? Now there's lots of structural issues, and I wish that I could get into all of them, but really I don't have the time. And I came up with a set of common challenges. But first, before I go to those, I want to talk about this, because this is the thing that I'm going to end with as well. And this is what I've learned over the years in speaking with people who disagree with me. You have to believe the best in the person before you. If you can't believe the best of that person, then it's probably better to have somebody else talk to them, frankly. You always need to listen more and speak less. Use words that are kind and respectful. Speak your history, your experience, and your emotion. When they are right, say so. And leave factual information and the scientific information and all the studies you want them to read, give those to them in writing. Don't try to make those arguments face-to-face, over the phone, or on Facebook. So here are the common challenges. Predator control is a part of our traditional culture. We respect how our grandfathers ranched. City people don't know what they're talking about. Our nation was founded on private property rights. Our communities have the right to self-determination. We know there are more losses than we can prove. And do you eat meat? So part of it, I want to run quickly through some of the difficulties with the common challenges and explain a little bit about why they're so powerful. So tradition. Why is this such a powerful argument? Well, the reason is because of simply the way it's stated. We as individuals appear to be rudely unconcerned with the loss of another's culture when we disagree with a rancher appealing to tradition. Moreover, most of us agree that in the face of globalization, there's real value in maintaining cultural differences and even historical practices, particularly with regard to the character-specific regions and indigenous people. So the challenge makes us rightfully uncomfortable, and I don't want to impose my culture on others. And every policymaker who hears this argument that the ranching tradition and culture is being damaged has that same disquiet in their soul. And so we need to come up with really good responses to that. But let me go on to the next. Respect. So coming back to, we respect how our grandfathers ranched. If we show them how grandpa's ranching wasn't a very good idea and he sure made a lot of mistakes, we're immediately showing disrespect to this person's family. And saying that in a room with a legislator present, it's very difficult to counter the argument. It's a smart argument on the rancher's behalf. City people. So those urban people, they don't know what they're talking about. So in representing them, neither do you. So one of the reasons that we become unsettled by this argument is because probably most of us are city people, and also because, and so they're right in one sense, but we also have the difficult position of explaining how city people have a foot in the great outdoors, that the value belongs to us as well. When you only have 5 or 10 minutes with a legislator or a commissioner, it's really difficult to completely discuss the tragedy of the commons, the fact that wildlife belongs to all of us. Property rights. So this is kind of a stand-in for all the rights that the cowboy tradition hangs on to. So, you know, when we challenge a rancher, we're challenging property rights, we're challenging hunting rights. Eventually we end up challenging the right to own guns. And all of those things confuse the issue because that's not really what we're talking about. But if the person who's standing aside and listening to the conversation between the urban and the rural, or the conservationist and the rancher, what they're going to hear is that I'm trying to take away the rancher's rights. community. So I think all of us would agree that to some degree that communities have the right to self-determination. But of course there are limits on that, and again we come back to the tragedy of the commons. So what if I were to tell someone in Seattle, a rancher, that if he came to Seattle he couldn't ride on that big wheel they have or go to the top of the Space Needle because he didn't live there? Well, I feel the same when I go out to a national forest and I know that I may not see a mountain lion because the rancher killed them because they preyed on his livestock. It's a much more difficult argument to make, and we don't have good analogies. And I'll tell you what, I searched for really great analogies that we could kind of kick back at the ranchers, and I couldn't find them. So we're all going to have to put our heads to this and see if we can make that difference. And then there's meat. So, this is going to depend on your own ethics, and of course all of this derives from your own morals and your own ethics. And I spent most of my life eating beef because I came from a ranching family. There's been a time during my life where I did not eat meat at all. Today I will eat beef, but it is so exceedingly rare because I will only eat grass-fed, sustainably ranched beef where I absolutely know that no predator is killed in its ranching. And I only do that when I'm meeting with that rancher and speaking with them face to face. So each of you may have a different answer to that question, but the reality is that the UN report basically